It's supposed to end the debate, but if industry reaction to last weekend's intergovernmental agreement on forestry is anything to go by, peace is a long way off. The Forest Industries Association is fuming about 11th hour changes, which it says were contrary to the draft they'd agreed to just days prior. They've called for the public release of the information the last-minute changes were based on. I spoke to the association's Terry Edwards this afternoon. Terry Edwards, how is it that a written agreement between state and federal government can lead to so many different interpretations and so much confusion?
Look, I think there's two probably distinct reasons why that's the case, and the first is that it was done in such an unholy rush. Just 2 weeks after the signing of the Heads of Agreement, a full intergovernmental agreement with all of the complexity that goes with that document needed to be completed. And the second reason was that so much was changed after Thursday night when it was shown to various signatories to the Statement of Principles process that they just did it too quickly. The changes were too dramatic and too far-reaching, and they weren't properly reflected into the document.
Has anyone disputed your claims of substantial changes between the Thursday night and the Sunday final signed document?
Far from it. In fact, this week Fiat has met with both Acting Premier Brian Greene and with Environment Minister Tony Burke, and both have confirmed that those changes were made in exactly the way we described it.
You weren't able, though, to take away with you on the Thursday the draft, were you, so that you could demonstrate the differences?
No, we weren't. Everyone that was there on the Thursday night was required to hand their copy of the draft agreement back, which we did in good faith. But because our version of events and what we say was in the draft intergovernmental agreement at that time has not been challenged, that hasn't become a major issue for us. If there was a challenge, we may in fact seek to obtain a copy of the Thursday night version, perhaps by FOI request or something similar.
In terms of apparent mistakes, certainly if it were to be taken literally, it would certainly appear, for argument's sake, clause 17. It actually spells, if you read it literally, 155,000 cubic metres, which would in fact mean 155 million cubic metres.
Yeah, that's right. When we met with Tony Burke in Sydney this week, we pointed out that we had concerns with the agreement, and Tony indicated to us that the agreement could not be changed. It's been signed by the Prime Minister and the Premier, and therefore its text is immutable. And I said, well, in which case we would then seek delivery of 155 million cubic metres of high-quality saw log each year. And I think it's fair to say the Commonwealth were quite shocked at that level of mistake in this document.
Who instigated that meeting with Tony Burke?
Tony Burke contacted us and asked us if we would like to have a meeting with him to discuss the concerns that we had made known publicly through our media commentary, and exactly the same occurred when we met with Acting Premier Brian Greene, who contacted us and asked us to meet with him.
Those last-minute changes, you understand, and it certainly would appear from comments made by Prime Minister Julia Gillard earlier this week, were based on advice from Jonathan West, the independent verifier, to the government, that supply contracts could be met without going into the 430,000 hectares. Now, you have publicly today called for that advice to be released. What response have you had to that so far?
None so far from that call. We did discuss this issue briefly with Tony Burke in Sydney on Wednesday, and said that we would be seeking a copy of that advice on the basis that both governments have now advised us that they relied on that to make the changes that they did. Now, it's completely contrary in all respects to the advice that we saw as signatories involved in the Kelty process.
Have you sought it directly from Jonathan West?
No, we haven't. I've got a meeting with Jonathan West early next week. I haven't been able to meet with him this week, but we will be talking to Jonathan West about it. But it would be unusual for an advisor to government to provide that to us. It should come from the governments that commissioned the advice.
Now, he's the independent verifier of high conservation value areas and oversee a group of experts. Is your understanding that he's got his terms of reference yet, or whether in fact he has knows who is going to be on that group that is going to be responsible for such significant decisions?
My advice, as at about 15 minutes ago, is that firstly the group hasn't yet been formed, and secondly, the terms of reference for that group are yet to be established.
And yet there's now just over a week to go before some initial responses are required from that group. Is that doable?
No. In our view, it's not. I think it's an unrealistic expectation to think that that level of technical requirement can be carried out in that time.
Is it plausible that this group could come back with results that less than 430,000 hectares is deemed to be high conservation value, and in fact, you lose less?
It's our estimate that it'll be much lower than 430,000 hectares. What the number is, I can't say for certain. It depends on what the definition is going to be of high conservation value forest, and that's yet to be established.
Is it possible there may be some who would argue that with the signing of this agreement that you've got that compensation assured for many in the industry that have been struggling, that you're now being a sort of a deliberate spoiler to the rest of the agreement?
Look, I'm sure there'll be people that will make that observation, and frankly, the opinions of those sorts of people we're just not interested in.
Just finally, how far will you go? I mean, it seems to be the sort of the linchpin or incredibly critical to get the advice that was apparently provided to the Prime Minister on the basis of this major change in terms of not being able to access that 430,000 hectares. How far will you push to get that made available?
If it's not provided freely, we will then seek it under right to information legislation from both governments, and if it's not made available that way, we will have no alternative but to continue to publicly state that we have no confidence in this process, and we will deem it that governments have something to hide if they won't release that report.
Terry Edwards, we're out of time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie.